I'd like to welcome you to the April 1st, April Fool's edition of the TCC meeting. Thank you all. I've called the meeting to order. And first thing this morning, just a little housekeeping. Of course, we do have the hybrid option for folks that couldn't attend on in person, but it is an in-person meeting. And staff's good about keeping up with any kind of questions in the comments section. So first item is the minutes from the March 4th TCC meeting. I'll entertain a motion to approve. Motion and a second. All those in favor? Well, first, any discussion? Sorry, jumping the gun there. Any discussion or any changes? All right, seeing none. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Second item on the agenda, I'll open up the floor for any member of the public to come comment to this committee. Seeing no one rush to give us any comments, I'll declare the public meeting closed. Next item is our single action item today. It's the TIP amendments for the April cycle. I'll turn it over to Matthew Cushing.
Good morning, everyone. You'll hear about two different TIP updates from me today, but April are new amendments that you'll see coming down the cycle. As a reminder that the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program, it's kind of a short range plan where we actually program federal funds on a fiscal year and phased basis. Today, I'll be bringing 4 amendments that are all related to one project. I will make an asterisk and note here. We talked last month a little bit about a TIP freeze while the RTP is being adopted. So we will need to adopt the RTP before we can move forward on these amendments in a formal process way. But we can still make board actions here. So what you're going to see on the list today, there are 4 amendments. Essentially, they are all moving funds to the last project you see on the list here today. So that is the Cherry Lane extension with the I-40 interchange. It's a Murfreesboro project. We are moving 2 chunks or 2 funding buckets to this project now. One of them is the MSTBG. So this is the STBG suballocated to the Murfreesboro urbanized area. And we are also moving NHPP funding from the TDOT grouping to the project as well. So the MSTBG funding comes from 2 regional programs that are in the TIP. That is the Transit and Technology Program and the Active Transportation Program. We're moving over just under $5,750,000 of federal MSTBG funds here. And the NHPP funds come from TDOT's NHPP grouping. So happy to answer questions there. Hopefully that's a relatively straightforward move. I will make a note that you will likely see in the future cycle more amendments on this TIP project. There's multiple phases to the project and lots of funding requests. So in the future, you'll probably see this broken out into 3A, 3B, 3C. We're not there today, though.
We'll also add that at the last meeting, we made mention of a discretionary grant application that Murfreesboro is making to the BUILD program. And if they receive that award, they're interested in a potential fund swap with the Nashville-Davidson UZA or TDOT. So I think, pending that award, we also might have conversations about accelerating the use of future year funds to support the project, to provide the match to the BUILD grant.
Thank you. Okay. Any questions for staff?
So this depletes basically your regional technology and transit program. Would that be still a project in the future?
Yeah, it shifts out the program's MSTBG that's in that bucket. It doesn't touch the Nashville-Davidson UZA.
No, I understand that part, but it's transit and technology assigned. It's going to a roadway project. So I was just wondering if there's a thought on keeping that as a, as a transit priority in the future for those kind of projects.
Yes, it is. So the way the policy is written, the 2050 RTP does continue with those programs and does assume a share of the Murfreesboro STBG goes into those pots. But the way we've managed this policy is at the end of the TIP period, if the funds aren't used from the allocated money, that we let the communities within the urban area decide how to redirect.
You might as well use them.
And we did, I know Matthew reached out to the other jurisdiction located within the urbanized area, which is Rutherford County government, and consulted with them before bringing the TIP amendment to the committee.
Thank you.
Can you just clarify which TIP is being amended for this in these?
That would be the 2023 to 26 step, the one that's active currently.
Well, yes.
And it will then transfer
Okay.
to the.
Is my guess, I have a concern is that, is the resolution going to be today's signature or today's date? I'm sorry?
TPP will be the resolution date, so the 15th, the same day that we adopt the RTP.
Okay, well, I think that kind of goes towards something that we'll discuss later, but we need to make sure that these dates coincide with an active plan. And if it gets ahead of it, then it's probably not going to work, a bedside thing.
Yeah, and that's very intentional, Matt. We're doing concurrent amendments to the tip with the RTP, which is what we
Okay.
did 5 years ago. We did concurrent tip amendments to align with the adoption of the RTP. But to clarify, we're amending the 2026 year into those tips. That's how the resolution is drafted. It's a shared year between the two programs.
Only one tip can be active at a time.
And that's, we don't know when the new tip is going to be active. The tip was adopted by the board back in November. It's waiting on the STIP certification, but we're managing the financials in that tip to keep it aligned with the 2026 year of the current tip.
This project will not make, this particular project will not be in the 26-30 tip because you don't need to have them in both tips. That's the thing.
If it's not obligated, Matt, let's talk about offline, what we do in order for it to be available for obligation once the STIP becomes certified.
Understood. But I think you're complicating it. That's all.
If we do not add it into the new tip, we want to come back and do another amendment to the new tip.
Okay.
Unless the money is obligated before the STIP is certified, which is unlikely.
STIP, we are hoping will be done and will be ready to go in May, which includes all the tips by reference. So
But the resolution is drafted to affect both programs, the 2026 year in both programs.
again, I think this is complicating what can happen by doing what you're doing. That is my,
Sure. If it would be a lot simpler if the money would be obligated before the new STIP is certified. But if we don't know that for sure. We do not put it in the new tip before that becomes effective and it's only in the old tip and it's not obligated, we would still have to amend the new tip again.
understood. All right. Said my piece.
Well, I mean, I think this is just a reflection of the fact that we've got a lot of these documents coming due at the same time in a sort of illogical way, but it's just how the cycles have landed on us. I mean, it's been one of the struggles is trying to get a new tip in advance of updating the plan. And the STIP hasn't been certified yet. So we've got to, just like we did 5 years ago, manage both tips until the new one becomes effective.
Right. But this is like all the 10 other MPOs have not done it this way. And that's where I think,
I don't know,
like I
if the
said,
other 10 years, other 10, not all the MPOs are on the same cycle for updating the documents though. It's as simple as if the money isn't obligated in the current tip before the new STIP becomes effective, we would have to amend the new tip again. You wouldn't, I mean, that's pretty black and white.
I don't know. It's in both plans.
Listen, we'll work it out afterwards. But the resolution has been written the way it's been the last couple of tip cycles. We haven't received that feedback up to this point. The resolution that is amending those tips has been written and in packets. So to answer your question, we're amending the 26th year of both programs.
Any other comments or questions? All right, seeing none, I'll ask for a motion to endorse the tip amendments for the April cycle.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next on our informational items today, the first informational item is actually what we endorsed last month, the March cycle tip amendments. And there's some additional information from the TPB meeting. I'll turn it over to Matthew Cushing, staff.
thought you were done with TIP. You were not. We've got more to talk about here today. To ease your nerves, I will not be reading the whole list like I did in March again. No worries there. You'll likely recall last month, I read to you a large list of amendments, a number of them aimed at cleaning up changes in that new tip, that 26 to 30 tip that we were talking about just a moment ago. This was endorsed by TCC and went to TPB. There was a lot of conversation, but at a high level, the biggest part of the conversation was to defer that vote until the April TPB. And there was kind of a main focus. I'll say as a reminder, there were 4 general categories of amendments. There were 2 amendments that added funds. There were 2 that removed locally managed projects that had been completed. There were 9 amendments that removed TDOT projects that were not in the 10-year plan. And there were 4 that made scope changes in that 26 or 30 tip. Where a lot of the discussion focused was those project removals on the TDOT side. There was a request from the TPB to TDOT to kind of provide some more detail on what the future of these projects might be. Are they still in a project pipeline? As examples, are they included in the choice lanes concept, or the I-65 Pell study, or other places? There was a request to say, hey, can you tell us a little more about where these are in the future? Are they coming back? We have sent that request to TDOT. I believe they're still collecting data here. I don't know if I'll have updates on that today, but just a heads up that we will be hoping to bring that to TPB on the 15th. I will also say, I'll pause at the end here. I'll also say there are a couple notational changes to note. You see the color coding on the screen here. On the TDOT removals, we have changed the notational styles from remove project to defer project. We think that's more in line with the intent of the board to say that they'll be somewhere in the future. We're hoping to see these again. Another change, and this is more scope specific, the travel congestion and clean air improvement project. This is where we added NEVI funds, electric vehicle infrastructure funds for charging infrastructure along interstates. One of the awardees did not want to move forward with their project. This is in Rutherford near Epps Mill. So we are reducing the funding amount on that project because one of the awardees did not want to move forward. But otherwise, yeah, I don't know if TDOT would like to comment on the status of the request at this point. If you don't have anything yet, I know you're still digging.
Yeah, we are still compiling those responses to those projects. The money doesn't necessarily, we don't have a way that tracks where the money goes from taken from one to another. That's just never how it's been. So we may not be able to tell you exactly where this money went into some other project, but we can definitely give you the status of where they are.
I think that's the intent. We understand that everybody's fiscally constrained, but in terms of the scope of work that is being proposed by these projects, I think we're looking to know, is it that scope being incorporated to another project that's already on the books, or is it being incorporated into the choice lanes project that is?
That's what we are working on providing. The one other thing I think to discuss is this defer project action. I don't know exactly what that means. I mean, it's deferring. I don't know if that's like a formal federal term that can be used in a TIP amendment. And I don't know how you're going to identify that in the resolution.
Our language, and that specific word was requested by the chair to denote that it's being deferred outside of the horizon of the TIP, but not a project that the APO is saying they want to see go away.
Yeah, I mean, this again.
There are federal regulations in terms of the terminology and resolutions. It's
again,
about communicating with the public what our intent as a region is with federal funds.
This is where the complication comes from. Is that this TIP, the TIP that is currently is waiting to be approved through the STIP process during development was not supposed to have these projects in it. We've had that conversation during the development numerous times that these projects had to be taken out of the 26-30 TIP because they were not moving forward. It doesn't mean
I'll raise a point of clarification there that those conversations did not happen. And TDOT was at the meetings where we adopted this and did not speak up and asked to be removed.
there are, I mean, we've got,
You go through the emails, there's a lot of back and forth, handwritten notes from TDOT about what changes needed to be made, inconsistencies between divisions. We can talk about this
I'm
offline.
saying that there was never an indication that these projects were to be taken out of the TIP.
That's right. And regardless, the way to communicate to locals that TDOT is deferring its commitment financially to projects shouldn't be through the NPO process. Because when you award money out, the first person you call is probably the mayor of the community. And I think the frustration from the local government perspective, and you will have a chance to show them where maybe things were missed, is that they don't feel like they were communicated with like TDOT, that projects in their community no longer had financial commitments on them. And you have good rationale for it. I don't think anybody is saying that, TDOT doesn't have good justification. But, the NPO process really isn't the way to communicate to locals that NHPP funds that that department had committed a couple of years ago are going away.
The thing that gets me is that if you're identifying this project the way that it's listed as deferring it, it may not be that type of project. It may not be the same scope moving
And
forward.
that's
So
what we need from you.
Well,
If you
I know,
would rather
why-
have some, okay, but that's why we try to get these meetings scheduled. I have not made any progress on that yet. I understand people are out of town, but we're on the clock to make sure that we have the right language going into the 15th, and only you can help us determine what that language should be. We changed this defer at the request of the chair.
we still have time. Don't defer doesn't.
Well, this is a committee meeting. This is where we talk about our opinions about what language should look like before it goes to the board. But that's why we have that word there.
Is it your stance, Matt, that removal should be the language for all of these? Is it your stance that removal should be the language for all of these?
Well, in a technical standpoint, yes, because they are not being deferred. They are being removed from the TIP. They can stay in a plan. But like we talked about at the board meeting, we can identify where these projects have been absorbed into what we're taking into the future. So I don't know why we're calling it deferred.
Well, I told you why, because the chair asked us to
I
change the
get it.
word to something that denoted the fact that these projects were just being removed outside the horizon of the TIP, but not being removed from our scope as an.
I don't think this is the first time that a project has been removed from a TIP. So, and it's never been called deferred before. So
Staff? Any questions or comments for staff?
I have a question, and maybe an offline question. Tell me if it is. What happens if in the Transportation Policy Board, when the board members are looking at this a second time, that they say, well, you know what, this is so controversial, we don't feel comfortable about it. We're going to amend the amendment here and take those out of being discussed and only approve those that which were already kind of unanimously agreed upon. What happens then?
Yeah, we'll be prepared for that scenario with multiple resolutions in anticipation that the board will have options as to which proposed amendments within the resolution they want to move forward. But the NHPP funds are programmed. The state is required to be fiscally constrained. That is the authority of the NPO, right? And it's a partnership with the state, but those funds are programmed. So if they're not removed from the TIP, they're programmed. They can't be put anywhere else in the state. And that is the true issue that needs to be resolved with TDOT, is that you've basically locked up that share of the NHPP program on these projects until it's moved off.
And one of the things that I heard today that I kind of heard at the Transportation Policy Board last time, and really was a little bit taken aback by it, was the language projects should not have been on the TIP even before, but they were. And
They were in the previous TIP at the request of TDOT. What's happened is, since that request, there's a new 10-year plan that doesn't account for the funding to those projects. And in some cases, granted, maybe in all cases, in a very justified way, some of these projects are on the I-65 corridor, and TDOT is saying, we're about to start our P3 work on that corridor to determine what's the major investment that's going to happen through the Transportation Modernization Act. And so from their perspective, and I think this makes sense, if you're doing interchange, if you have interchanges in the tip, you might want to wait to figure out what they're going to look like until you get through that process. That makes perfect sense. There are some other projects that just may be combined into other projects that are on the books. And that's why, that's the information we need to get from TDOT to be able to inform the locals as to the fate of these projects. So it's not uncommon for projects to shift as they go through design and engineering and morph into other projects, and the financials need to change. But they were in the tip in the first place at the request of the department because they made that financial commitment in the form of the NHPP funds to those projects.
So in the vein of trying to get the information to the ones, because there were just a handful of us that had real questions about that tip amendment and the removal of these 9 projects. Does it make sense for TDOT just to host an interim meeting with those agencies and say, look, we're gonna host a session. Those who are interested in trying to understand this, come to this point and let's have a sit down and talk about it and try to get all of that conveyed out prior to the next Transportation Policy Board so that we can all be on the same page. I mean, we don't want to be adversarial against, especially other ones of our neighbors who have projects that need to get adopted and moved forward, but we do need to get some resolution on some of these issues.
I agree with that.
And that's in the works. I mean, that's
Yeah,
been that's what we just talked about is it's been difficult to get those scheduled, but those requests have been made.
So in the grand scheme of things too, let's go back 2 years to the first 10-year plan. So that's where, it's essentially got 100 projects in there. So that's where all these projects, they're no longer in there. So they're not active projects. And so conversations were had across the state, presentations were delivered during that first round of the 10-year plan, noting all that. So there was no administrative requirement that we needed to go ahead and remove those then. So statewide, that conversation was like, all right, we got a new tip coming up in a couple of years, so we'll do all the cleanup then. There's been a lot of local projects across the state as well as TDOT projects removed during this last year. So it's this has been coming for 2 years, and now we've got to that now. So obviously when the action is taken, that's where it kind of highlights, even though we've discussed it very prominently for the last 2 years. We've had 2 cycles already of the 10-year plan. This year will be the 3rd. So just wanted to note that as well, how this all kind of came to.
I think that history is really important. The other thing about the 10-year plan, we talked about this at the board meeting, is that there's the desire for it to be a fully itemized list of projects, but it is not. There's a lot of things happening in terms of project delivery and project selection that are not itemized in the plan. So one cannot simply look at the plan and determine what the exact financial commitments are to this region. An example of that is the April cycle tip amendments that we just did, where we moved NHPP funds from a grouping to a project in Murfreesboro. That wasn't something that was directed at us by TDOT as a result of the 10-year plan. I mean, is that project, some form of that project may be in the 10-year plan. I don't know if the NHPP funds that we just moved from the grouping is itemized in that way from the plan. And so that's a very similar situation to what we see in the I-65 corridor, where if NHPP funds on early phases of work, often that is coming out of groupings before projects are itemized for construction in the 10-year plan. So we have to just remember that we can't look at the 10-year plan at face value in terms of the list of projects that are happening in our region. It's just simply not that precise.
You can look at the projects as the project's moving forward. The funding associated with it is not what will maintain consistency. And that's really, I think, one of the side effects of being a pay-as-you-go state is that money is moving all the time to account to make sure that we have spent the money, line ourselves up for an August redistribution if we can. But the projects in the 10-year plan are the projects that the state has committed to delivering. And, for the last few years, we've had 100% delivery rate. So they're moving. And with all the budget talks and everything that's trying to bring more money into getting these things accelerated, you can be reliant that the project's listed on there. They may not be the project. And that's the thing that I think some people get hung up on, is that it's listed as, you know, an improvement, but it doesn't tell you what the improvement is because it has not been determined.
Hung
Through
up
Pell-
on it, but when
Pell
you're
is
putting
what-
something in the tip, you have to be specific, and those specifics aren't in the 10-year plan. So you can't just rely on the 10-year plan document to be telling the NPO what needs to be in the tip.
That's
That's
what
my point here.
fine. But I mean, our new TIP platform will have all of that in readily available. We are getting the TIP streamlined. So this does not have to happen,
I
but
commend that, but it is not at our benefit right now. Right?
And-
It's not there right now.
And to take to verbalize what the frustration is, I think we all understand that the 10-year projects are committed to, and those are happening. I think it's the things that are happening outside of the 10-year projects. We can't just say, well, if it's not in the 10-year projects list, then it's not happening. As we just discussed,
you have an
a
example.
lot of stuff is happening outside of that with the groupings mentioned. And the lack of understanding on what all that is going on is the source of all this frustration.
I'll give you an example where you say Matt Catcher and Franklin is in the 10-year plan, but then you tell the city for 25 million short, go find money from the NPO. But there's really no formal request from the department in that way. And I brought this up at previous meetings that we're not getting that information from TDOT where you're partially funding projects in the 10-year plan. So if there's a funding shortfall on a project in the 10-year plan, then how do we interpret the actual financial solvency of the project in the plan?
There shouldn't be partial funded projects in the TIP. That's the,
This is the problem with the inconsistency in information that's out there with
if
respect.
you're talking about a project that's beyond the last fiscal year of the current 10-year plan, then that's correct because the money's not there
Talking
yet.
about a 2032 project. Did I mischaracterize that?
No, that's correct.
I mean,
You're saying it's partially funded.
That's correct. Yeah, we estimated that project at $100 million and it's shown right now at about 75, with 50 of that coming from the city or 40 of that coming from the city.
Well, is that going, the 10-year plan, one of the things I was going to say is the 10-year plan update is imminent. So maybe that cost estimate is changed, but I'm not sure, like, whether John's got his hand raised. There's our region guy back there.
I've got a lot of background on this. I'm John Storm, the Director of Region 3 Project Management. So we kicked off Matt Hatcher. We had Paul Holes, and there's a great partnership. We look forward to get going. But yes, we are actively in discussions on that project. There's a lot of history on the funding and the partnership, and we're going to be meeting with the city early in April on this. But we discussed in the kickoff meeting that as of right now, it's 75 million. We discussed the priorities of the city and where, if there is not the $25 million more, how that project will be scoped and worked out. So we actively have a good partnership with staff on moving that project forward. We've kicked it off. It's going. And as Matt pointed out, there is updates to 10-year plans coming. But what we show is we have currently a $25 million TDOT commitment in 2032.
That's correct.
And that's our portion of that project.
Yeah.
You mentioned a lot of other projects too. I want to make sure for awareness, we've gone, and maybe we haven't done a good job at this MPO. I know I've gone to all the RPOs and other MPOs, but I hope everyone's familiar with our 3-year plans. The 10-year plan is just a part of our program. And that's our major capacity projects. But all of our bridge replacements, our resurfacing, our safety projects, that's where you find those. They're all online. We acknowledge that they're on different portions of our website. We're doing a website refresh right now to get them all combined, but they all are there. So if anyone has a question, please feel free to give me a call, but I can generally direct you to a plan that shows a project that we as TDOT are working on.
thank you, John. I think the other challenge with the 10-year plan, and this was part of our December meetings with TDOT, is that the amount of money in the 10-year plan isn't a representation of a fully funded project cost. It is the amount of money that the state has allocated in the next 10 years to a project that may not have a cost estimate yet. So we asked that 3 times. Are we hearing this correctly? And that was confirmed. So it's difficult to just be told to go look at a 10-year plan and you should know what to do with the TIP. That's the point here, is that we've got to have a lot more discussion about the true financial needs on these projects beyond what's showing in the 10-year plan document, which has also changed a couple of times in the last couple of years. It's about to change again and may change again after into the summer.
If it's a project in the 10-year plan, then you don't have to worry about the tip details. TDOT will provide those details when the amendments come or when it's time to do that. I mean, I don't know why you need to think like it's your job to determine the money flow for a 10-year plan project that is being added to the tip.
We have a 25-year plan where those 10-year projects live to. And communication from local saying, we have a project in the 10-year plan that may need to start programming, but it's got a funding shortfall.
Yeah, but it's a plan. Like that, the dollars in the plan are not, they're not, they don't have to be committed like that. That's not how it works.
With the money from the 10-year plan that does need to be programmed, we do need to have that detail. And that's what we're talking about.
We do that. When the time comes.
To bring it back to remove or defer, which I think that's what, we're getting to, because it sounds like we've got to figure something out. And I know this is the place to kind of have, buy in and talk about things. And from the city of Fairview, we've been bumped down. So, I mean, I understood when the last meeting, when Williamson County had removed on some of their projects, that they were like, wait a minute, we planned this, we don't want this removed. It needed to be cleaned up because there was some projects that could move money. So it makes sense and we all agree. But going back to just the wording, which is the action item that we're voting on, is remove or defer. It was recommended to change it to defer, which that's fine. I get your point, because if it's not funded, you're, wanting to try to figure out this. But if you've been around a long time and you've seen money you've gotten removed, or your project gets thrown to the bottom of the list, it doesn't mean your project still doesn't need to be done. And matter of fact, it's just gotten worse and worse each year. So the traffic issue is still there. So if we're going to vote and we don't like defer, could we use like until approval or to fundings available, whatever, to make it happy to, probably move the conversation along is what I would recommend us just having to discuss, is the reason with defer, because you're saying it's not guaranteed money, right? Am I getting you?
It's not about the guarantee. Again, these projects, as they've been highlighted, are projects that will be moving, but not necessarily the way that it's listed here.
Okay.
They will be, and this is again what we've tried to talk about last week or 2 weeks ago, is that they're being absorbed into bigger studies that look at it more of a holistic view of the corridors, specifically 65. It's not just Moore's Lane. It goes from Interloop down past, into the Spring Hill area.
So what's your recommendation versus remove or defer?
Well, my recommendation is remove. And again, I know it sounds a lot more harsh than it is, but defer, I think, just confuses it. It just makes it more confusing as to what is actually happening. Because this defer, it may be deferred indefinitely, but are you going to leave it as a project with that title, with that project, with the termini and everything as that, or is it just going to disappear at some point and be absorbed into something else?
Well, and that makes sense for like 65. I get that. But some of these other projects, they need to get done. So, do you say remove on the stuff that you already have factual information of, or can we find a terminology? Yeah.
Well, and I'll also just point out that the actual what's happening is in the exhibits in detail. And it'll be as detailed as TDOT can give us details. So this is not an operational term. It's the tip sheets that are in your packet are exhibits to the resolution and say exactly what's going to happen to the extent we know what's going to happen based on information that TDOT's given us. So I think this is just a semantic issue that essentially results in the same outcome, which is these projects are being kicked out of the horizon of the tip. Same outcome. The detail is not in the word, but in the exhibits attached to the document. And we do have work to do before the 15th to know what to say about these projects.
Because they're in the RTP too.
Yeah, they're on the RTP. Yeah, which isn't, going back to Matt's point, isn't a funding commitment. It's a priority for funding.
But it is taking up space that other projects could have gone in had they not been in the RTP.
They're not being removed from the RTP.
The money associated with them in the project, in your fiscally constrained plan, the money that is attached to these projects that are being removed could have been put on a project that had been in the illustrative list or somewhere.
It depends, like the
Right, I know.
I-65 corridor is just a P3 project in the RTP. We don't have HPP funds on it in the RTP. It doesn't matter, the RTP never gets that specific in the same way that you just mentioned the 10-year plan doesn't get that specific. The difference is we represent our plans to be different things. We represent ours to be priorities for anticipated funds. You're representing the 10-year plan as being the financial commitment of the state of Tennessee. So they don't represent the same thing. Our plan is just like, we're going to have $17 billion of anticipated revenue, and here are the projects that we intend to do with that funding. It's not program level information. The short term, yes, right? The feds are going to require that TDOT be fiscally constrained with the NHPP program. And if the NHPP funds are programmed in 2026 on projects in this region, it has locked up those NHPP funds to be moved somewhere else in the state. You cannot compel TDOT to do the project just because it's in the TIF, but you do have programming authority over those federal funds.
My plain language assumption is that these deferred projects are hopefully in the short list for when the next 10-year plan comes out, that they bubble to the top quickly for reconsideration to be added back in. So I guess my question is, can we consider if the deferred language can stay, and if it can't and has to change to removal, then can there be some kind of a formal short list so that these aren't getting lost in the shuffle for locals? I think that kind of sounds like the core of what we're all trying to achieve here.
I think that, yeah, and that's what we're trying to clarify with TDOT is what is the continued commitment to these projects, and when do you anticipate that commitment being realized? I think the language is completely the board's discretion. There are not federal regulations that govern that. The details of what's happening to the TIP are in the exhibits. So to the extent we have an opinion at this level about the word, we can convey that to the board chair. But in the end, I don't think the amount of time we're spending on defer versus remove is practically going to mean anything in terms of the outcome.
And as a housekeeping item, just, this is great discussion, but again, this is an informational item. The action will actually be taken at the board level. Had a question?
So
Go ahead. So I think I saw Dara first. Let's go Dara. Then I'll get you, Jim.
So you do have,
Or Jim.
y'all do have a meeting scheduled with the Williamson County folks to discuss these prior to our board meeting. So we'll have some clarification.
That is the plan, yes.
We're going to be in bad shape if that plan doesn't happen. So
No, well, I understand. I mean, we all see the urgency.
Jim had to get it, couldn't bottle it. Dara.
Thank you. So just to be clear, the term defer project is a preference of membership on the board.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? All right. Like, again, good discussion. Please talk to your TPV members and have that discussion as well there. I think, and I laugh, but it is important to have that discussion there so they understand what our discussions are here and what's coming to them. Next informational item is an update on the RTP. Daniel McDonald.
All right, did you want to start
Yeah,
off on the beginning?
Daniel and I will tag team this, Mr. Chair. Happy to present to you the draft regional transportation plan for the 2026 through 2050 period of performance that is scheduled for adoption on April 15th. And just as a reminder, as we get into this, the adoption of this plan is a federal requirement in order for us to program funds from the federal grants into our region. It's must cover a 20+ year period of time. We have historically done 25 years at a time. Our current horizon will go out to the year 2050. Must include a balanced budget. So the thing about our long-range transportation plan is that must be fiscally constrained. We get to determine the revenue assumptions for the plan, but once we make those assumptions and document that they're reasonable, then we create a balanced budget for the funding recommendations that are contained within the plan. We do also publish an illustrative priority list of unfunded needs to continue to demonstrate what the gap in funding is for our region. So I'll talk about that in a minute, but the plan is required to be include a balanced budget, and it must address the federal planning factors and national performance based planning requirements. None of that is new. These have been requirements of the last couple of federal reauthorizations of the Transportation Act. And then it must be updated every 5 years. In our region's case, and regions with air quality issues, it's a 4-year plan update cycle. Moving on to the next slide, this is just a reminder of what was adopted in our 2045 plan. Back in 2021, we had a $10.5 billion fiscally constrained plan that included the federal formula funds and the match to go along with that money, included analysis of existing conditions, infrastructure, and forecasts for the future, and identified strategies in addition to individual projects, but strategies for addressing all of our goals and objectives that are contained in the plan itself. I think the key here is remember that $10.5 billion figure as we move forward in this presentation. So 2050, go to the next slide. We began updating this regional transportation plan to extend it through the horizon year 2050, almost immediately after the last plan's adoption. There's always constantly ongoing studies and research, model enhancements that allow us to get ready for the next plan update. We start this timeline here in 2024, but you can see those bar charts there that indicate previous year activity coming off to the left side of that chart. But establishing our analysis of base year conditions was concluded in 2024, as well as the calibration and validation of our land use development model and our traffic forecast model, travel demand model, which predicts future conditions across the region. That wrapped up by the end of 2024, which allowed us to issue the call for projects to each of you to submit your ideas for addressing the needs that were identified through the long term. Of course, you pull your projects that you submit to us typically through your local planning process as represented in your major thoroughfare plans or comprehensive transportation plan elements or your capital improvement budgets or plans, typically the source of your projects. But once you submit those to us, what we do is then evaluate your candidate projects against for their ability to help us achieve our shared regional goals and objectives. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So that was the call for projects. We actually extended the deadline multiple times. The original deadline for submitting applications was March. We ended up we pretty much doubled that amount of time, which has also kind of put a strain on the back end of the schedule. But we wanted to make sure that we had really good information from the locals. We also didn't receive the TDOT projects until very late in the game. It took us a little while to work through exactly what was being proposed from the state. So we did have to absorb a little bit of delay in the call for projects, but we did stay fairly on track with the county workshops. If you go back to the previous slide, where we had multiple rounds of workshops where we either came into your community or met with you online, where we convened the jurisdiction within each county to talk about what everybody was proposing, make sure everybody was aware within the county what was being proposed, as well as discuss with you our approach to evaluating your projects. And then through these county workshops, we also showed preliminary results and updated results of the evaluation as we went through each iteration of project evaluation and scoring. Those workshops wrapped up, I think, in August, September, by and large, right? And then in the background of all this is our engagement with consultants who are doing cost estimates on your projects, who are doing analysis for us in terms of conditions and forecasts for system preservation, as an example, biped level of service. All that stuff is happening in the background to provide the technical documentation that we need to include in the plan to demonstrate need into the future. And then in December, we had an initial presentation of the project list that was going to go to the state for review and comment. We had meetings with the state on that project list, including their projects through December into January. And then here we are with the plan available for public review and comment and scheduled for adoption at the adoption hearing on the 15th. Of course, it doesn't stop after that. We start working on the next 5-year update while we're also implementing projects in the plan through the tip amendments that we talk with you about pretty much every month at these meetings. Next slide, Daniel, we can skip over the next slide, just a little bit more detail of the more recent steps over the last year or so. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, here we go. So a couple of highlights in terms of the RTP itself. We had a base year of 2023 in terms of describing existing conditions across the region. Like I mentioned, we started working on this plan in about 2022. So the snapshot of data for local land use and traffic counts across the region were calibrated to 2023, but those conditions were forecast out to 2030, 2040, and 2050, which represent the planning horizons of the plan. Over the life of the plan, we're looking at a 40% increase in population from 2023 to 2050. So about 760,000 more people expected to live in Middle Tennessee in the 7 counties represented by the MPO. Over that horizon, 64% increase in employment, or 900,000 more jobs. Of course, what we're doing is predicting where these people and jobs are going to be at the parcel level, so we can feed that into the traffic models to understand where traffic volumes are going to be in the future. The result of the travel demand model shows about a 29% increase in aggregate VMT across the region, or about 18 million more miles per day being driven on area roadways. And that resulted in about a 38% increase in daily VHT per capita, or about a 25 minutes more per day per person spent on roadways as a result of the population employment increases and the burden that that places on the existing roadway system. So there's a lot more information in the plan document itself about existing conditions and our forecasts, but those are sort of top line numbers in terms of what we're looking at for the future. Next, I'll cover some of the top line information in the plan with respect to the funding or the financial element. So our base year for our financial planning was 2025. It's okay that it differs from the 2023 base year for existing conditions. We want to use the most recent financial or the funding apportionments from Congress and most recent levels of funding from the state to project forward 26 through 2050 in the plan. So 2025 is our base year for financial planning. All costs were initially estimated in 2025 year basis, and then ultimately costs were inflated to expected year of expenditure with the funding application table itself. But looking at the financial planning assumptions, we saw about $334 million in carryover funding. So this is unobligated money through September 30th of 2025. So that money that's unobligated money in the TIP that rolled forward into fiscal year 2026, which is the first year of the 25-year plan. We add to that $334 million, $522 million in formula grants, and this includes the matching funds from federal highway and FTAs, all the transit programs, all the highway programs, sum to about $522 million when you add the required 20% match for those grant programs. Our financial assumptions were that revenue would grow at 2% a year throughout the life of the plan, which is an assumption that very well aligns with the last 10 years of funding apportionments to our region, which have grown about 2% a year. Will it grow 2% a year? Who knows? Highway Trust Fund is insolvent. Major reforms have to happen. But up to this point, the Congress has been transferring money from the Treasury to the Highway Trust Fund to make the program whole and to continue to increase revenue for transportation across the nation at about 2%. So we just continue that trend into the future. And that's a reasonable assumption for future year revenue and will be accepted by our federal partners when they do the compliance review of the plan. So projecting the $522 million out to the year 2050 and adding the 334, we get basically a revenue amount of $17 billion. And our goal with the plan is to then show the list of projects that would be the priority for that $17 billion. So that's in a nutshell what the purpose of the plan is to communicate to the public and to TDOT, who will make a lot of the actual funding decisions year to year, what our priorities are for future funding to the region, right? Looking at the plan, we also accounted for revenue beyond the formula grants. The formula grants are really what we're trying to prioritize projects for, but we did make some assumptions for revenue that would come from discretionary grants, the Build Grant Program, for example, out of USDOT, the New Starts Program, for example, out of FTA. We anticipate being competitive for that money in the future on some level, so we made some assumptions for that. We also accounted for discretionary grants that have also happened recently, are part of our financial forecast. But 2.6 billion total in discretionary grant funds. I hope that's a low number, but that's what we estimated for the plan. And then we also identified $12.6 billion of state and local funds that are not required for match. They're just either state or locally funded projects or overmatch commitments from the state or local governments. A good part of that 12.6 billion that you see there, though, are revenues anticipated to be generated through the P3 authority of the Transportation Modernization Act for the I-24 corridor and the I-65 corridor. Those are about $4 to $5 billion a pop. So you add those two numbers together, and that's how you get very close to that $12.6 billion of other non-federal funding. The other significant contribution to that line would be the Choose How You Move program, which on its own is generating about 250 million a year present day. Michael, does that sound about right? So pretty significant amount of money that's going to provide local funds to build out the transit program, but more importantly, not more importantly, but maybe equally importantly, make us more competitive for discretionary grants in the future that hopefully exceeds the 2.6 billion that we've estimated throughout the life of the plan. Any questions about the revenue forecast, right? So when you add up those numbers, the plan itself identifies $31 billion of funding. Compare that to the $10.5 billion that we adopted into the last plan, and you'll see that this plan, unlike the last plan, is accounting for Choose How You Move. It's accounting for the Transportation Modernization Act and the P3 revenue. And it's also reflecting the additional funding sources at the federal level that have been created beyond the authorization legislation of the Transportation Act. There have been some supplemental funding programs that have been created in recent years as well. So a lot more revenue in the mix as we moved into the funding recommendations themselves. So next slide, I'll cover this next slide, then turn it over to Daniel for the next few. A couple of things to remember about funding recommendations. We have a fiscally constrained list and an illustrative priorities list. I would argue that really they're equally important. The fiscally constrained list is a bit more meaningful in terms of what is allowed to be programmed in the TIP. But the true goal of our transportation plan is to demonstrate what the needs for funding are for the region. And so as much as we are going to talk about the fiscally constrained portion of the plan and the projects that are on that list, we need to also talk about the projects that need to be done. You haven't identified revenue. And so if your projects fall on the illustrative list, they're still important. And we need to make sure that we're telling good stories about why these projects are beneficial to our region and demonstrate to the state legislature and Congress that we need additional funds for transportation. And to some extent, you being able to demonstrate to your local legislative bodies the need for additional local contribution as well. So there are two lists, the balanced budget list and then the additional projects that you all identify, that the state has helped us identify, that recommendations that kind of have come from our studies are continue to be unfunded. The list, like I just mentioned, the fiscally constrained list represents our top regional priorities for anticipated federal funding based on reasonable assumptions. I bolded this next bullet, but they are not grant awards and they're not a formal financial commitment made by GNRC or TDOT or the USDOT. It's basically an expression of if this money comes our way as we anticipate, this is how we want it to be used. Does that make sense? And it's clear. Sometimes we overinterpret what the plan is representing in terms of a financial commitment or a grant award. We don't make financial commitments at the NPO level until we program money into the TIP. And we need some upstream financial decision to have been made in order for us to do that, which is typically decisions that are left with the state. Another thing about the plan is capacity projects, and those are projects that are adding vehicular capacity to the roadway network, must be included in the fiscally constrained list in an itemized way. It needs to be specifically called out. It can't be in a bucket. It needs to be specifically called out in order to be programmed into the TIP. But it doesn't mean we don't put things into the TIP that aren't included in the adopted transportation plan. What will end up happening is you get a discretionary grant from USDOT or TDOT updates the 10-year plan and includes a project that we didn't account for April 15th. We will just have to amend the plan to account for that project as we're amending the TIP, right? So By being on the fiscally constrained list, it just streamlines your opportunity to get into the tip. But by not being in the fiscally constrained list, it doesn't preclude you from getting into the tip. It will just require a companion RTP amendment to go along with it. Right. And then finally, I think I've already pretty much established that the electric priorities are just as important as the fiscally constrained list in terms of demonstrating the gap in funding for our region. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Daniel, who's going to recap for you our approach to evaluating projects against our regional goals and objectives.
Right. So you all have seen this probably a couple times now, but it's worth understanding or re-understanding how we got to choose our priority list as a region. So I'll go pretty quickly over this because we are getting short on time, but we have our policy framework spelled out. These are guiding principles, regional goals, and primary objectives as the meat of it. These were created by the local agencies, the TCC, the TPB. We did a lot of surveying to understand how to put that together. And these are the 6 buckets that they came out of: state of good repair, roadway safety, congestion management, economic opportunity, minimizing disruption, and alignment with local plans. And you can see also the weighting of these is shown there. So roadway safety consistently between the two. The last plan that was adopted in this plan came out on top. So when we look at the components of that and put that through our scoring system, you know, the 30% kind of weight is going onto the roadway safety. And then you can see the other weights distributed there. This slide kind of shows you how that process of scoring goes. So as Michael mentioned, we had a submission process where all of you were putting into our Apply app your projects, the history and anticipated costs, and also importantly, what the goals and purposes and objectives were for that. A lot of this scoring is automated. We have our what I think of as a really sophisticated travel demand model, land use forecasting model, things like that. And that's what that middle column there does. It spits out scoring for example, if safety was one of the purposes and needs of this project, what are the roadway safety and crash characteristics? It does that for every project, but it really helps us to hone in to whether that project is addressing the purpose and need on it. And that's what goes to the last column there, which is the qualitative assessments. The staff look at every project from the lens of those 6 buckets and say, okay, if this was a safety project, is it really addressing what it's trying to address there? So is it meeting the goals and objectives? Is it potential for causing disruption to vulnerable communities or environmental assets? Things like that. So this is kind of spells out exactly what that modeling system looks at when it's spitting out some of the scoring and prioritization. So taking, for example, the last bar there, congestion management, you know, what are the congestions, especially in relation to all the other conditions that exist across the region? As we know, there are a lot of them. What's the bike ped level of service? We know that just widening roadways is not the only way to alleviate conditions. So does this project, what are the other indicators of how other people outside of a car could get around? And then what are the proposed features to mitigate congestion? And same with all the other buckets. Again, just taking one as an example, we use the economic opportunity bucket to pair that with our land use and forecasting model, where we see what the high growth areas are for employment or for residential, and how this project would interact and overlap with those areas. So with all those components together, we bring those into the kind of simplified star scoring system. We have our 5-star regional priorities. These are the kind of big things that we think should be done as a region. And then really the projects, the applicant projects start at 4. And these are projects that we are committed to because they have a programming history. If they have been in the TIP before, that means work has been done on them and we want to get them finished. So they're automatically going to get kind of to the top of the list there. And then the new starts really are the 3, 2, and 1. And that's where that ranking system really comes in into an important effect. And, you know, as we get down into the financial constraint, it gets pretty simple at this level because we start at the 4 and we say, you know, we want to commit to finishing these projects. And then as funds move down through the rankings, we figure out how many 3-star projects we can put into that fiscally constrained list and 2-star on down. So is that back to you?
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. The other thing I would say about the way we make our funding allocation recommendations is that there are cases where lower ranked projects will get funded over a higher ranked project because of grant eligibility. And so, for example, interstate projects that may score lower are eligible for really the intent of NHPP funds. So as we're allocating NHPP and SDBG, which are the 2 funding sources that we're really making most of our recommendations, those are the pots of money that we're recommending to be allocated to itemized projects. That's a sort of a deviation from just the strict order assignment of funding down the list. Okay, so that there are additional considerations beyond just sorting the list and going down it, and that I'll point out. To wrap up here, we've got a few slides that give you the summary level information about what's included in the detailed project list in your packet. Just a breakout of the funding recommendations by type of sort of the grouping of projects here. So this is an accounting essentially the 31 billion that we're going to walk through here. Okay. So of the 31 billion, 6.8 billion are in the plan as a programmatic set aside for safety, transit, multimodal upgrades, technology, air quality, O&M type projects. These are groupings like our policy groupings for the active transportation program, which has been renamed to Safe and Active Streets program to denote the intended use of that money to also improve safety. The technology program is an NPO set aside, but the bulk of this money is in the big statewide groupings that we anticipate being spent in our region for highway safety improvement or maintenance of the interstate system and the state routes. And so we've also got groupings for all the transit formula funding is initially put into the plan as a grouping because the project selection for those grants are typically done in consultation with the transit agencies on a year-to-year basis. So we account for all that money in the grouping itself. So that's the first bucket of money of the 31 billion, 6.8 you'll see at the top of the list are the programmatic set-asides, where project selection is made subsequent to the adoption of the plan. And then the next list of projects are the 5-star projects that Daniel mentioned. Some of these are regionally ideated through work with our local partners, where they may be implemented by one of you sitting around the table, or it may be a regional corridor where we've got a priority investment identified that's going to be implemented by TDOT. Some of these projects would be in the 10-year plan, but not all of them necessarily. It's just the projects that we want to elevate together as a region that are important to get done over the next 25 years. We call these the priority capital investments. Second grouping of projects on the detailed sheet in your packet. 1 billion, this $12.7 billion of revenue identified for these projects. The majority of the funding for these projects is coming from the P3 revenue that the Transportation Modernization Act identified on the regional corridors, but namely I-65 and I-24 coming out of Nashville, going south and going east. There is also 1.8 billion on these projects in anticipated federal discretionary grants. So build new starts, for example, and then 1 billion in anticipated formula funds allocated to these projects. That's the second grouping. These are itemized on the list. The next grouping are the projects that the TDOT projects that are not maybe a priority capital investment, but the other state projects that are in the 10-year plan. And how they're accounted for. The plan is 1.4 billion of that project list is sourced from formula grants. There's just shy of 25 million sourced from federal discretionary grants. I believe that's the build grant that Mount Juliet received on their project that is being implemented by TDOT from the 10-year plan. That's the discretionary funding there. And then 209 million and other non-federal funding sources that might be a state overmatch or a local contribution to a TDOT project. And then the last grouping of projects are what we're calling at this stage locally. Just a delay. Yeah, sorry about that. That's that for you. Other local capacity operational improvement projects. These may end up being implemented by TDOT, but there's no department commitment yet to sponsoring these projects. So we either identify the local as the lead agency or GNRC as the lead agency. As we get into design and figure out what the project's going to look like, we'll also figure out who's going to ultimately implement the project. But all told, there's 10.7 billion of the 31 billion that is recommended for allocation to these local projects. 7.5 billion of that is from the formula grants. We've estimated out to the year 2050, 762 million in discretionary grants. Some of that is assumed future awards. It also includes recent awards that some of you've gotten from Build. And then 2.5 billion in other non-federal funds. A lot of that is going to be sourced from the Choose How You Move funding source. So that is an overview of kind of the summary statistics of the funding recommendations. Let's go to that last slide and then we'll stop for questions. I know we're getting close on time. We do have an INRIX workshop in here that's scheduled to start at 10:45, just as a reminder. So ongoing and upcoming. So we're optimizing the narrative right now to make sure that it's clear, accurate, that the data visualizations are where they need to be. We're fine-tuning project descriptions. So some of you have reached out, asked us to change the way we are wording the description. We're agreeable to that as long as we're not changing the scope of work that's being proposed, as long as we're just making it easier for people to understand what it is that you're going to be doing with the money. We're making those edits. We're verifying the accounting of other non-federal funds. So if we're not representing a local contribution or a discretionary grant in the correct way, we're making those adjustments. Those don't address the required fiscal constraint in terms of formula grants. We're also bundling, just for the state and the federal review, the technical reports that document our process and all of our planning assumptions that go into the appendices. We're incorporating public feedback. We haven't received any public comments today, but we'll continue to monitor that throughout the public review and comment period, present the feedback to the board as they consider the plan for adoption. But regardless, all public comments are incorporated into the technical appendix before it's submitted to the state for review. And then finally, we'll submit it to the state and federal partners for the compliance review. Just make sure the plan addresses all the regulations. And then if there are any adjustments we need to make, we would need to do this through administrative modifications or amendments based on the process that's defined in the plan itself. So that's ongoing, upcoming. I'll say one more big thing we're going to be doing as soon as this plan is adopted is going back to the new TIP. If you remember the TIP we adopted back in November, the 2630 TIP only carried forward unobligated money and added a few new projects from TDOT. We have not yet, as an NPO, said, how do we want to program new money from the RTP, because we hadn't yet adopted the RTP. So we'll have a call for projects again for the 26 through 2030 TIP and then process the appropriate amendments throughout the 2026 to get that new money program. So it doesn't stop after April 15th. In a minute, Daniel will also talk about some of the other things that we're going to be doing as an NPO in the next coming months that are a lot more interesting and a lot more fun to be doing on a day-to-day basis with respect to studies and research that we've got scheduled. Mr. Chair, that's staff's presentation. Have big questions.
Well, before we take questions, I would encourage all of us members of the TCC to really get with your TPB members and the voting members and really help them understand what's going on in the TPB before their meeting in a couple of weeks.
I'd suggest the slide about sort of the how to interpret the funding recommendations is a good one. And of course, reach out to staff if you'd like to schedule a time for us to meet with you and your member. That's appropriate. I'll probably ask the team to continue to do office hours between now and April 15th. So there's just a period of the day where you can know that you can hop online and talk to one of us before the 15th.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Matt?
So typically, to try to speed up review on the TDOT and federal side of things, we provide a checklist that the MPOs submit to us when they submit us the draft document that lets us it lays out like the federal regulations and where in the plan those things have been identified. We have not received that yet. So we're not going to have time to be able to go through that by April 15th and be part of that. Yes, vote for it. So we will be abstaining from it at the TPB. And again, I want to make sure that everybody's had the chance to review that document before formal adoption, because it could create the same kind of issue that we're having with the TIP. Stuff is kind of going in a backwards approval process that's not typical. So again, that's my comment.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'll say that that was expected. There was no anticipation, not communicated to TDOT that we were going to submit to the full document for review before we took it to the board. And it's not the first time this has happened. It's just, when we get to the finish line on these plan updates, we know that there might be state federal comments that come in after adoption. And it's to be expected, we may need to do an amendment if something's off.
By law, we do not have the ability to stop an adoption. However, if the plan is deemed non-compliant, then it will stop immediately and freeze everything again. So that's the risk that you take by adopting prior to state and federal review.
We're pretty good about it being in compliance. Now, where there's going to be issues, historically, issues aren't on compliance. Issues are on the details associated with projects, which we have been meeting with TDOT about for the last year. So hopefully we've minimized those discrepancies so the feds don't question, well, what do you mean about that project, right? That's typically where we're going to get questions. So hopefully we've done enough consultation with the state up to this point to be able to minimize that.
Just quickly mention, because Choose How You Move has come up, and when you look at the timeline, you know, the referendum passed right as RTP begins being updated. So we've had a couple iterations where we now know a little bit more what we're doing, the schedule. And so I just wanted to communicate back to this body that you will probably see changes as we flesh out projects that would then trigger maybe a companion RTP amendment as it goes into the TIP. We're going to try and sync things up as much as possible. But it's just kind of the timing on things. We've also been working really diligently with TDOT staff. So not so much headquarters, but Region 3 to see the overlap of projects between Choose How You Move and TDOT 10-year plan and then the 3-year programs. And so that's actively underway. And so Region 3 staff have been pulled into that, but you may see big kind of amounts change or the types of projects change that's listed from this initial set of projects that are in the RTP.
Appreciate that. And in a way, some of the conversation we had with Matt earlier in the meeting, and to your point, it's unfortunate everything can't be aligned all at the same time, but we're in this situation because there are new funding streams and decisions that have to be made before we fully know exactly everything that we're doing. So it's actually, we're in a better position now than we were back in 2021 when we adopted the plan in terms of our ability to address transportation needs. But from a process standpoint, it's made it fairly messy with everything being misaligned. And it's just the way the world works, and you just do the best you can. And I think we'll probably, once we adopt this plan, we haven't done this before. I think it might make sense to do like an annual review of the plan to account for those changes, process amendments as necessary, at the very least, report back to the region in terms of how the cost estimates are also changing. So that we're constantly on the forefront of demonstrating what our funding gap is instead of waiting to see what it looks like in 5 years. So I think there'll be some changes to how we report out on the performance of the plan on a more annual basis, just to minimize some of the friction that exists right now between the partners with respect to just knowing all the details for these projects.
Make sure I understand, because I think I may have gotten a little confused, but this RTP, that's going to get approved. And then once that's approved, then the next is for the TIP. And then there'll be a whole process there that'll be a call for projects based on the RTP. What do you want each city or each community wants to move forward with TIP funding? And then we'll go through that process. And then the existing TIP stuff with the amendments, that's all just as it is, or as it's amended. but all the new money, for lack of a better word, that's still to come. That process is still to come.
That's right.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. That's what.
And in some cases, some of you have already let us know what your funding needs on the short range projects for the next few years. But we haven't done really a formal call for those projects yet. So everybody will have an opportunity to either reassess what you've already told us or to put something on our table. Now, we're going to be prioritizing the projects that are in the RTP, right? So.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right. Thanks, staff. I'll turn it over now. TDOT report, Stacy.
I got a couple of things. Matt said he wasn't even gonna say anything today. He's talking more than me. The draft 20-year plan could come at any day now. If y'all recall, last year, there was a draft that was released that included a list of projects and information. And then when the final budget was approved at the end of the session, there was some additional projects added. So we're expecting that same process this year. So probably get a draft in the next few days, or again, you never know what those timeframes might be, but we would expect by the end of April that we'll have a final budget and the 10-year plan as part of that as well. We've beat the tip process to death, but we are working on a new e-stiff platform. We've been working with MPOs for over a year with that now. That could, we will try to integrate some new processes, some that may have an impact on you all, just kind of food for thought. Again, just trying to get everything integrated in this new system prior to it going before the MPO. We'll be working with you all, local programs, and working out that process for that, as well as the process internally for our projects as well. So just food for thought. A little bit new platform will be coming out. You'll be exposed to that in the coming months. Our planning grants, we've got two planning grants fixed to kick off for Thompson Station and Williamson County. We've sent out the request for the consultants to accept those projects. So we should be scheduling probably next week. We'll be scheduling scoping meetings to get those going. So look forward to getting those going as well. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Any questions for TDOT? All right. For the chair's report, and of course it's a long meeting, so I actually have something to say today. So for the chair's report, many of you may or may not know that we've been operating with just a single, I'm the vice chair technically right now, and I've been operating as the chair since Josh left us. So we still need to actually formalize. There's been a lot of things going on, but we need to formalize a chair and a vice chair for the remaining fiscal year through the end of September. So as such, after talking to staff, they've kind of schooled me a little bit on how the process works. Is the tradition is to name for me to appoint a nominating committee of typically the past three chairs. Well, two of our past three chairs are now, they've left us. So they have someone new for their community now. But with that in mind, and still stay with the last three communities that were chairs. So that would be Glenn Harper with City of Columbia, Matthew White with City of Mount Juliet. Almost go blank on there. I just drove through there today. And Marshall Boyd, who's not here, but from Sumner County. So. Oh, there you are here. Sorry, I missed you. So you are here.
Engaged as well.
Yeah. So that's the nominating committee of being appointed. Hopefully they are okay with being voluntold. If not, you're still voluntold. So please do a good job. And staff will be reaching out with the recommendation that they have. That's really all that I have.
All right.
I'll turn it over to staff for anything.
I'm aware of the time we're at, so I'll be quick. The TIP status report is in your packet. Caveats, as mentioned last time, we are in a new TIP period, so the numbers reset. We're slightly ahead of where we would expect to be in the TIP cycle. 8% of the period has elapsed as of February, and 10% of funds were obligated. There's a lot more detail in the packet. Look there. One thing I will comment, this is the packet from February. Since then, the Safe Streets for All NOFO has been released. So that is not reflected in the packet yet. It will be in the next one. But if you are trying to get one of those in, the deadline is May 26th.
Is there any other business to come before this committee? Oh, you got one more.
Yeah, he's gonna. I'll just recap real quick. We have a UPWP reminder slide. That was yesterday, but we got a few great recommendations and updates from local communities. But this is a constant thing that we can amend in. So we will be considering those new regional ones, and also thank you for letting us know about some of the local ones. The upcoming meetings, Transportation Policy Board on April 15th, that will be a specially called meeting, as you know, to adopt these amendments and the RTP, followed by the Regional Council meeting, which is also a big meeting for adoption of the area plan on for aging and disabilities and updates on regional initiatives. Then we have our roundtables and again, the TCC coming up again next month. Finally, I wanted to introduce officially, he's been in about 2 months, Connor Carroll. Most of you have known his name or emailed with him. We didn't want to introduce him too early because we knew as soon as we did, he would get all of the TIP amendment requests immediately straight to him. So wanted to welcome him aboard officially. He's gotten up to speed really quick and been a huge help. He's going to be our TIP administrator basically, and making sure all these amendments and modifications go smoothly throughout. So give him a welcome if you see him. And I think that is it.
Before we adjourn, Mr. Chair, just a reminder, for those who registered for the Interact Signal Analytics Workshop, we'll get started here in this room in just a couple of minutes. And we do have box lunches if you RSVP. We may have a few extra box lunches. So if you want to stick around and kind of fill that out, feel free to do so.
Now, is there any other business to come before this committee? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. We are adjourned.